All right, welcome everybody. We have our March 20th, 2019 edition of the PowerApps community call coming at you right now, and I'm happy to say that Audrey is back with us this week. Audrey, do you have a nice time down in Silicon Valley?
I sure did. That was pretty
Estuvo en
powerful.
Venezuela.
I met a lot of great
Oh,
people
you go.
and did a bunch of demos. So it was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to be back.
That's
Well,
great.
After you figured out your schema and you've set up some of the entities that you have in it, you've got some data in there that you can work with. So you got a representative sample of the types of information that you're going to be working with. The next step to move on to is determining the type of app that you want to build. And there are two, decisions to make up front. Really, is it an app that you're going to have embedded inside of another application? It through a native mobile player or through a web app. In the case of the embedded scenarios, we have the SharePoint custom forms, the ability to take those SharePoint lists and then provide a richer formatting, multiple screens inside of them, putting in a variety of data while you're doing it. There's a variety of different embed stories that we provide with the Canvas app that allows you to put them in a number of different places. Some of these are the ones that are more likely that you would consider in terms of a InfoPath to PowerApps conversion. Or you could end up having it as a mobile app, something that you have on the different phone devices. In helping with the app types, the richness of the app, a number of features such as responsive canvas layout. We've now changed it so that the application can ask its screen what its height and its width are, so that you can have formulas inside or expressions that respond to that. So when you have a phone app and you've turned it off so it's not doing, well, actually any phone app, not just the phone app, you turn off the scaling and you're able to get the height and the width and then use that full space in terms of your layout. When you're in a browser, it's that, well, in the mobile phone, that's useful in terms of eliminating some of the letterboxing that can happen if you're depending on your phone dimensions. But in the browser, you can get into some calculations that adjust the height and the width more dramatically based on the available space. You could always do that information or some of that logic before inside of your app, having your app, controlling height, width, X and Y of various elements. Now, but before you couldn't respond to the screen changes. Now we're allowing you to respond to the screen changes and to create apps that are more context aware of where they're at. Very useful in the web app and in the mobile, but even more so as you go into some of the embedded scenarios where your space is less known in advance as to how that's going to sit. A feature, then that's also in public preview right now. I think Emma had a blog post that came out just on Monday about that. We have a unified control framework that started with our model apps that's coming into public preview. That coming this semester. It really is a mechanism where you can define as a professional developer or take a packaged application and wrap it in our PowerApps control framework, which provides a well-known interface. And then that control can either be used inside of the model-driven app or inside of the Canvas app. This allows scenarios like if you're you have access to a developer who works extensively in React or has some skills in building front-end interfaces. You can build all kinds of different controls that might not be available out of the box in the system. And that allows you to have a lot more control over your experience within that particular control. or you could be taking controls such as the SharePoint FX control set and taking and wrapping those inside of our PowerApps control framework and inserting that in your app to get some other functionality. The ability to have that unified control framework allowing other controls to come in really extends the palette that you have in terms of the application. And if there's something that you don't have as a core control out of the box, this really lets you plug that gap or to create something very customized for your user experience because of their needs. For the places where you don't need to build such a custom control, but we have some of the components already in the box as basic control types, you can take and you create components that stitch together through formulas and provide a reusable element for your application. So something that exists either in multiple apps and you want to share some of that component, that logic, or something that repeats many times throughout an app that you have. The components allow you a strong reuse story for the creation and managing what you have. Next up is our business logic area. No app is complete, or most apps aren't complete with just supporting create, edit, and save capabilities within the app. A lot of times there are logic that you need to enforce in terms of, fields or validation rules or conditional fields that need to be filled out based on other fields within the system. There could be integrations into other systems where data needs to be triggered based on it, or you need to call some other set of logic. And we have a variety of options that are available within the PowerApps to implement your business logic. The first and most direct is your Canvas app expressions. Every property is an expression and can be set in terms of how it responds to other changes within the app itself and the current state of things. Which is great for an application where you don't need to coordinate with other apps in terms of its behavior. You have a lot of control over what happens in that specific case. As you start moving out and needing capabilities that might span apps, or you want more enforcement than just what happens in the app itself, we have the ability to call into Flow. Flow is a very rich, powerful tool in terms of the interaction of data, where there may not be a connector for something and you need to do something more specialized. Flow allows a lot of data interactions and pulling things into the app to help you solve problems. As Todd mentioned earlier, the custom connector is another means to provide business logic through the actions that you can define on that. Those actions could be doing updates on some service or pulling down an alternate set of data. In the CDS area, there's a couple of capabilities that are specific to that platform that are business rules and more declarative definition of, logic in terms of the validation, what's required along the way for things to enter, or plugins, which are imperative code that somebody can write to provide things that can't be done through rules or through Canvas expressions. But those two things are specific to the CDS, whereas the other business logic options are available across all of our data. Some features that we have added recently to help out in there, we have the viewing of results in formulas and subformulas. As you're working in our formula bar, there's a flyout that'll start showing you information about that as it's evaluating, understanding what the inputs and outputs were, the results of that, and gives you insight into what's happening inside of your expression. So if something isn't behaving as you expect, you can see what's happening inside of that logic and make some adjustments. The other areas around improving are formula and error handling. We continue to add to the app checker that we have that identifies issues within your app so that you can get not just the red dots throughout the visual aspect of the app, but you can have a list of all of the places that we have problems and some guidance in terms of your formulas. So the business logic is really a strong place, and it has a lot of flexibility for the applications in terms of how you author them.
It is, isn't it? It's amazing how complex of business logic you can create by hooking into these various things without writing any code at all. Stuff that used to take us weeks to do, we can do in a day or two now.
I've seen phenomenal apps used by combining one or more of these components or these options in terms of your things. And it isn't just a one or the other. They're often used together to coordinate and to fill in pieces and build on the strengths of each other.
No doubt about it. It's amazing how complex you can make a Power App. And we see people making today, right? They were just forms for the most part, and now they're like a full-on business app that you typically see in a desktop application or even a web application for that matter.
Yep. Yeah, it no longer is the day when it's just an app from data style app where you're mainly doing create, edit, save functions within your app. You now can
Yeah, and when you start to combine
that we are provide shared across applications. That's one way things can be done because we have a better import and export a gap we're aware of, and Microsoft just hasn't taken care of that yet.
Okay, thank you, Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question from Russell. Where can we get info on the Unified Control Framework? Can we use Office UI Fabric controls in PowerApps?
Well, on.
Okay, perfect. That's all the questions I see.
Okay.
Anton and Brian answered others.
Thanks everybody for giving me the time to run through some of this, and thanks to my coworkers and others for helping to answer things along the way.
And thank you, Adrian, for taking the time to put this together and come share it with us today.
I should point out is I only called out features that are, in almost every area. There are numerous features for the different platforms in terms of data interaction. I just focused on a couple of for years with that, and that you can do. So don't take that as just a couple of items, but that was just kind of the latest ones to try and highlight some other things that maybe haven't heard about as much, or are announced for this semester, or just came out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. We hope and good luck with your next session you're presenting at the MVP Summit today.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on now, and Dave is going to talk and migrate your InfoPath forms to PowerApps. So Dave, I'll let you take it away.
Well, good morning, everybody. I want to say a shout out to everybody that comes to my App in a Day sessions. I've led quite a number of those in the U.S., Boston, up and down the West Coast here, I was just out in Reston, Virginia as well. So anybody that's on the call that's been to one of my App in a Days, well, good morning to you. And you folks across the sea, well, good evening as well. So let me get down to it. I'm going to show you a very interesting tool today on how to migrate from InfoPath to PowerApps. Let's get started. There's my contact info. And the first thing you want to think about is when you're looking at to PowerApps, you're going to have a number of questions you're presented with. You're going to start with saying, old recs out there that we don't need to worry about, which ones are very important to us. And then you're going to be faced with trying to understand how big a job is this and how to prioritize things. Once you get your arms around it, maybe then you can start to put a plan together. And then finally, how am I going to migrate some of this data? So as you approach the project of migrating InfoPath to PowerApps, think about where the things are, which ones you use, and then you can start to understand how big a job it's going to be and start thinking about how you're going to migrate the data, permissions, all that stuff. So as you think about the data, would store data in two main ways. One way would be XML. Maybe you had digital signatures or something like that. It's very likely you're going to have your data stored as it's shown on the left-hand side. And what that means is that every single instance of the form will be stored as a file, an XML file. It's a little hard to read, but if you can squint your eyes enough to see it, you can data within it. There's a second way, and that is that sometimes you just had an InfoPath form that was replacing the default form in a SharePoint list. And so you would have a pretty easy way to migrate that data because it's already stored in a SharePoint list. But if you have the data stored in XML files, that's not so easy because you're going to have to figure out a way to map all of that data into a structured fashion so you can do a row for each record and a column for each data field. So when you look at the InfoPath migration, and we've looked at this a lot, and I'm going to show you a tool for this, we see it in 5 steps. So the first step is going to be taking an inventory of what you have. And you need to be able to walk through all of your SharePoint sites and all of your farms and have some way to do a comprehensive inventory and say, what do I have? Where is it? How do we use it? Who uses it? When was the last time it was used? How complex is it, et cetera, right? And once you can finally get your arms around it, and we're dealing with companies that have literally thousands of different InfoPath forms right now. Once you get the inventory figured out, the next step is going to be, okay, let's attack this and let's pick a form. So once you pick a form in step 2, you're going to map out if it's XML or if it's a SharePoint list, you're going to map from the source where it lived in InfoPath to a new target that you're going to replace with PowerApps. And then you're going to export out your data in step 3, and you're going to do data cleansing. And then after you've cleaned up your data, you're going to import that into your new target, whether that's SharePoint or CDS or you name it. And then the last step is you're going to create a new Power App. And we have a tool that'll help you on 1 through 4. Number 5, you're still going to be creating your Power App, but at least you'll have the data over, and we'll talk about that here in the next couple of slides. So when you fire up our tool, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, what it'll do for you is it'll run through a site or a site collection or a farm, and it will run through and get a list of all of the different InfoPath forms that you're using, along with where that form is, how many there are. I'm just walking through the columns here. What type it is, and by type I mean if it's a form library, that means you're storing the data as XML. If it's just a regular list with InfoPath, you can see that personal action form. That means the data is stored in a SharePoint list. Looks like it's going fuzzy for a second, but we'll come back. It'll see here too, date last modified. And the date last modified is telling you when was the last time someone used this form. And that's very helpful because you know, hey, are we even looking at this thing? The complexity of the form, and it's somewhat arbitrary. We have a complexity scale across the top. If it's less than 50 fields, we consider that to be low. If it's 75 to 100, we would say that's high. And if it's more than 100 fields or it has code behind it, which is common in some of these complex forms, then it's going to be very high complexity. We also show you when the last time the template was modified that is used for that list and who modified it. And this is great because as you start to dig into these, you're going to find that you might have fields you don't know what they're used for. You're like, what is this DC1 field and this DC2 field in this InfoPath form? And it turns out that was probably used by the developer of the form for some sort of logic. So it's great to know when was the last time someone modified the template that's used in that form and who was it, so you know who to talk to. Okay, so just again, I'm going to repeat on this one real quick. You're going to see the title of the form, where it is, how many there are, what kind it is, when was the last time it was modified, meaning when was the last time we actually used it, how complex it is, if there's code, and when was the last time the template was modified. So if we take a look at, for example, let's look at employee safety log. That's an interesting one. It's about the fourth one down. And we start going across. We see there's only 4 of them. And we can see it was last modified 1/6/2009. Well, that's a long time ago. And also there's some blanks in that thing. There's no complexity. And so that means that that form template probably has some serious issues with it. Either we can't read it for some reason or it might be missing. But the fact that it was used last in 2009 and there's only 4 means it's highly likely I don't have to worry about that one too much. Now, if we look at another one right above it, employee payroll discrepancy, there's 1,963 of them. That was last modified. Someone used that in September of 2018 and it's very high complexity. That is something we want to focus on. That is something that we're using that's going to take some effort, and we probably want to put that near the top of our list of things to move. So this report is going to be extremely helpful to you to be able to understand what is it we're facing and how much effort are we talking about and how much time do I have? I've got to get on this, right? So let's get the plan together. Now, if you look at the bottom, there's a couple other things. There's a button there that says download template, and there's another one that says download inventory. Download template is going to let you grab the template behind this InfoPath to start working on it. And download inventory is going to save out this report as a CSV file to open up in Excel. So you might want to break this up if you have many forms across many farms. You might run this for each farm and then munge all of that together into a single spreadsheet to come up with your project plan. So a lot of information here in this. Let's keep moving.
And Dave, that's really nice that you can download that to Excel, because then you can put filters on these columns and things and apply a little logic to help you quickly sort things and make your plan quicker, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So you can start to prioritize, right, and understand. And it's also great for talking to management. Like when you have to go present to management and tell them how big a deal is this, now you can present it. You can actually make some pretty nice charts and graphs out of it too, so that you can get everybody on the same page. It's not just the guys in IT.
Yeah, that's a good point. I really love how you've got the who modified it last here. I mean, gosh, 2009. Does the guy even work for the company?
Exactly, exactly.
Company, where does he work in the company now? I can really find out that tribal knowledge a lot quicker that way.
That's right. That's right. So the next thing you're going to do once you attack a form is, and we'll show this very quickly, but you're going to map out that XML schema or the SharePoint list behind it. And you're going to be able to then define what is it going to be in your new target, whether that's CDS, maybe you're moving this into CDS, or maybe it's a new SharePoint list. And then you're going to go ahead and export the data, clean it up import it, and then you're going to create your Power App. So we'll keep moving here. So just to show you sort of what we've got versus what it becomes, on the left side is an InfoPath form, and it's got some interesting pieces to it, right? It's got repeating sections, it might have some code behind it, and this is very common. If you look at this form, you're going to see that it's got a GL code section, and it's got two of those. One of them has, you know, sort of a breakdown of how much each bit was of it, and then underneath it, it's got some other coding thing. And what that thing becomes in the new world of PowerApps is this was an XML file. It was a single file. But when you migrate this over to either SharePoint or CDS, it's actually going to become 3 lists or entities. You're going to have the actual form, right? The parent, let's call that. And then those repeating sections, as you can see on the Power App on the right, they become new lists or they become new entities in CDS. And when you migrate this, our tool will actually put in I'll get technical for a second, but it puts in a foreign key. And what that means is that you can filter these new lists that are going to hold this repeating data based upon the ID of the parent, meaning I can grab the items in these related lists that are related to that specific request for the petty cache. And so we handle that for you in the migration tool. Under migration, we create the new lists. And we also, when we export the data, we put in the foreign keys so that you can filter it when you recreate your Power App. We also handle exporting out attachments. So if you have attachments that you can see on this file, our tool also migrates the attachments into the new target, whether that's SharePoint or CDS. So let's go to the next one real quick. And I'm just showing you here how on the left it was a single file, an XML file. On the right, it became 3 lists, right? It became the parent on the, I think that's in the middle, that migrated petty cache. And then you have your 2 child lists, GL payout and petty cache GL. So that one file on the left, XML, became 3 lists in SharePoint. And then we have to migrate all the data. You can hit the next one. So I'm going to show you, there's a bunch of resources here. Let me show you a quick demo. I'm going to take the helm real quick and just show you the tool in action for about 4 minutes. So let's see how much I can get done in that time. So I'm taking control if that's okay. If you can see my screen, if you'd let me know if you can see it.
Don't see it yet, Dave. It's coming now. Got it.
Okay, great. Okay, so what we do is we're now in our tool. It's called I2P Express, and I'm logging in to do an inventory. I've picked a site, and I've got my username. Hopefully I typed it all in properly. And when I connect, what's going to happen is that we're going to see the ability here to scan through everything, and I'm going to say find. So let's go ahead and find all of the forms that are in that site. And you can see it walking through it now to create that inventory. And it's looking through that site to find so it'll take a minute to walk through. While it's doing that, the next step that I can then pick a form, I can export my data, import it, etc. And there were a number of questions about importing and exporting embedded forms with SharePoint lists. We actually have a tool for that coming out as well. And in the resources, you'll have my contact info. If you're interested in that, just a tool coming soon that will help you with imported and exporting out embedded forms and flows that are associated with a SharePoint list. It's a new tool that will be out shortly. So we'll let this finish up here. Just takes a minute.
Hey,
Go
Dave,
ahead.
while that's finishing up, I see a question here at the bottom of the chat. The question is, can this be used with both 2010 and 2013 InfoPath forms?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
And your first screen went by quick. Are you targeting individual site collection at a time when you run this scanner?
So you can do a site collection, or you can do a farm.
Great.
So we're okay with that.
So you need to be like the administrator of those targets that you're.
You need to be an owner, right? You need to be the owner of that site. So here's our report. You can see it. I'm just going to finish up here with one last thing because I'm running short. But let's say that I have decided on picking a form. So I'm going to pick a form now. I'll pick this petty cash. So I downloaded the InfoPath template and I hit open. And what you're going to see is that it's going to crack open that InfoPath file. And now it says, here's the InfoPath name. Here's the data. And then I pick my target if I want it to be SharePoint or CDS. And then I'm going to have a shot at, here's our best guess at what that should be in the new environment. If I pick CDS, you'll see that some of the data types change, right? If I go back to SharePoint. And then it'll actually create the entity or the lists for you when you hit this in your new target site. If you see sections like this, this means it's a repeating section. And that means you're going to want to create a new child list for this. And so what you'll do is just define a child list. The tool will then create that new schema for you. And when you export out the data, it'll export out the data into new tables in a CSV file. And you can import these into CDS, into SharePoint, or if you have another data store, we even support that. So we hit the export, the import, etc. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to give you back control, if you would, Todd, and then answer any questions you might have. And Todd, can you take control? There you go. You got it.
Don't see any questions popping up here at the bottom. There might have been some that went by on that I missed while you were chatting, but we can double check and see if there's any that pop up and get to them here in a bit at the end. Thanks for showing us that. Boy, I was thinking to myself, how long would it take me to sift through a SharePoint site and figure out all the metadata that your tool figured out in a few seconds there? And it would take a long, long time, to say the least.
And the migration too. So we're working with huge companies that have literally thousands of forms. And they just, can you imagine trying to migrate the data and map the schema for thousands of forms that have all that data stored as XML? So this is a lifesaver for many companies. And if you're facing migration of lots of InfoPath forms, I think this is kind of a must-have.
Yeah, I agree. No doubt about it. Thanks for coming on and sharing that with us today. I saw a few folks saying they really enjoyed your app in a day that you taught them as well. We have here's all the resources related to our call today. So we have the release notes, the components, the responsive and the reusable components links pretty much mapped to the topic that Adrian talked about. And then the things Dave talked about here are at the bottom of the slide as well. And I just want to say thanks to Adrian and Dave one more time for taking the time to prepare for this and the time out of their day to come on and share all of their knowledge with us. I give them a big round of applause. Thanks, guys. Okay. Got some fun things to talk about today. The April 2019 release notes. If you haven't all seen that before, I encourage you to go see what's new and came out this month in PowerApps. We also have the 10 reusable components. This is fun. I like this one. Last month we talked about components, right? And since our call last month, Mehdi released a blog post on the PowerApps blog where he shares 10 components that you can download in a sample Power App and run them and watch them all work, or you can download like map controls, color picker. Very helpful things you may use for your Power Apps. I encourage you to check it out because you may find something there you need to put into the Power App that you need to write. It's already been written for you. The last two here, they aren't really recent news, but they're very applicable news to the topic at hand today with InfoPath. And this white paper called Transforming Business Process with Microsoft 365, I have a link to it there. Essentially what it is talking about is how do you do the things you used to do in InfoPath and SharePoint and migrate them to the current technologies we talked about today? My team and I were lucky enough to be able to build a project where we created some supplemental PowerApps solutions that align with the scenarios that are discussed in the white paper. And I've seen a couple people chatting about them and asking about the expense report template. And so you can go here and download them. And there are 3 different solutions in there. And each one of them comes with videos that say, this is what this solution does, another video that says this is how to install it, and all the code for the whole solution, including the PowerApps flows, Power BI reports, whatever the case may be, they're all there with step-by-step installation instructions. So if you run into any issues as you're going through those, put your issues in the GitHub repo and we'll take a look at it and get them squared away if anything pops up. Community contributions, one of my favorite parts of our call. So these community contributions are when you use Twitter to share something you did with PowerApps, like a blog post you made or an article or a presentation you did or a YouTube video, whatever the case may be. Share your knowledge and what you did with the community. Tag it with the PowerApps CC hashtag, and you're automatically entered into our quarterly raffle to win an Xbox. Thank you, Audrey, for hooking up the Xbox for everybody. So here's a few. And someone asked in the chat before, is there any video that shows how we can use those responsive capabilities in PowerApps? Turns out it's the first one on the list here. So there's a nice little video at the top and a little write-up about how that works. So thanks to everybody who submitted, and we are going to be doing the drawing. Tweeted to get entry into that, and then we'll do the winner. So that brings us to our monthly tips. So we heard a bunch of great tips today on how to migrate from InfoPath to PowerApps. And one of them that Adrian brought up and Dave highlighted is think before you migrate. One that I always like to do, we've done tons of SharePoint migrations throughout the years with my team and I helping people do that. And I see this much the same. Reimagine the processes as you migrate. Because you're migrating this process that someone defined maybe in Dave's example 10 years ago. A little bit better. And this is what I always tell the kids I coach on my lacrosse team is leave it better than you found it when I talk about where we practice and play. I like to apply that for these migration stories. Migrating things one along the way and reimagine that process. You can make your users even happier when they're done with the migration. Audrey, what are your monthly tips this week or this month?
So I'll reduce it down and then maybe I'll do a little follow-up blog. But first of all, I do want to say that I next era of technology. And think about when you need to consider information architecture changes. If you had very slow InfoPath forms or very heavy forms because of attachments, think about re-architecting that. Think about using our connectors in order to maybe when they attach, move it to a library where it's easier to these things, and we'll continue to share some thoughts with you. We've run out of time today, but I'll try and deprecation process. It's not like, okay, today we're InfoPath and tomorrow we're PowerApps. You need to help the business deprecate. And so there'll be a transition. And so think about who needs to be involved in that transition. And if you can get more people engaged with you to help you, you'll have a higher adoption level when PowerApps begins. So PowerApps forms begin being used. So I really love today's session, Todd. Adrian, very powerful, directly from the product group, telling us what to expect, what new features are in support of this. We're just wondering how I'm going to find my forms, right? So your site, you should start transitioning like now. I would not wait. I know it's tempting to say, oh, it's 2026, let me wait. Now, I would not suggest that because you're going to bring value to digital transformation, which will get people value they've not seen before. So let's get that value going, guys. Let's start showing them what the business application platform can do today if we can. Let's start that motion. So thank you all. You know, Todd, I hope that's good tips for now. I know we've run out of time, but we'll talk about it again soon.
They're all great tips. We're so lucky to have so many people join us today who know point out in chat that we actually hit the maximum amount of attendees we can have in a Teams call at 250 today. So that's really exciting. The call will be posted as usual on the Office Developer YouTube at the link you see there. Reminder, if you want to win that Xbox, submit your community comment by tweeting with PowerApps CC, which stands for this call, PowerApps Community Call. If you'd like to add the call to your calendar, there's the 17, same time, same place. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.